Hello, welcome to episode 18 of the US presidential election show. It's great to have you back. Sorry, a couple of days, of course, with the inauguration of the 46th president, Joe Biden. We got there, Ryan, and welcome, of course, back to the show, the in-house US politics expert at LP Brussels, who's followed this long journey right from the beginning to inauguration. Welcome, Ryan Hunter. How are you doing?
Great, thank you very much. It was a great day yesterday.
Yeah, well, we look forward to hearing your take on what happened yesterday. And obviously the focus of today is very much what it all means for Europe, new leadership in Europe, in the US and maybe the world, a challenge or an opportunity for the EU. So we want to get your insight on that, Ryan. But we may be just looking back, a few personal reflections. You know, what a roller coaster of a journey it has been, right from that very exciting results night, where I know you went through the night watching those results come in, that very inconclusive few hours where it looked like actually Trump may have actually won, according to some of the early results in Florida. Then, of course, the days and weeks of uncertainty until we got there in the end, and the legal challenges, and then what could have been what was a shocking assault on the Capitol, just a few days ahead of the inauguration. But the mood seemed to change yesterday. I think we could sense that America was relieved, just as Europe and the world was relieved too. Did you sense that too? This was not just a political change. This was an emotional change as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, an inauguration celebrates a transition of power, and all of that entails. But it was also a collective sigh of relief, and you really felt that. And from the minute the ceremony was underway, under all the security threat that it was being held under, you really had a strong sense of this is going to be a drastic change of tone, and that regardless of whether Joe Biden was your candidate, or whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the next 4 years are going to be a far cry from the last 4 years. And I think for the most part, we would be better off for it. Now, we also saw reactions from Europe that echoed the same thoughts. But from a personal standpoint, this morning, for example, huge weight off of people's shoulders to look at the White House and not worry about what the president will be tweeting or even doing. Just really hoping for a boring presidency in some regards.
Well, indeed, although I think people were rather surprised by the boldness of Joe Biden's inauguration speech, and I'm sure we all listened to it, but also touching on some really raw issues for the US. And I give you just one quote here, when he said, "We must end this uncivil war," and there's pretty dramatic language, that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls, instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility. That is surely Biden's core mission now, is to heal the divide in American society. Was that your take of the main message that he was trying to get across yesterday?
Well, I would say more than that. I think that's been his whole campaign. Well, even previous campaigns he's run for president, he probably could have given the same speech he gave yesterday many years ago. It's just that now we have a meeting of the man in the moment, and this is his moment to show that he's the right man to reconcile a country that, for many years we've been saying that Americans they're at the most divided that they've been since the Civil War, and he addressed that head on by saying we have to end the uncivil war. And there's been a very uncivil discourse. Now, we cannot say that Trump brought that by himself. It's been in the makings for a few years now. It predates Trump, certainly. now it's time to try and reverse that, to try and restore civility, to try and lower the temperature of our discourse, which is something he referred to as well. It's a very bold ambition. Whether he will succeed or not, we'll see. But I think people will appreciate someone trying as opposed to someone who's been raising the temperature for the last 4 years.
Indeed, and just coming on to that point, as you say, that he wants to unite the nation, that's been a constant theme of his, but he's approaching it in a very optimistic rather than a pessimistic way. I mean, for example, he said, with unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus, and so on and so forth. Really bold ambitions. And uplifting and positive commitments. Is a very, and again, I think speaking to people's reactions here in Europe, people were quite uplifted by his rhetoric and indeed the boldness of his program.
Yes, it now comes the moment where expectation will meet reality. He has certainly said the right things. He's said some things that we haven't heard many presidents say, let alone many people in Congress, talking about systemic racism, for instance, in his speech yesterday. He won't be able to address directly many of the issues he raised. But the question is, can he set a tone for a conversation that has to be had that can then lead to results that he's looking for? And that is the big question now, right? Having set the tone, can he maintain it, A? And B, can he inspire, right? The changes required, and it cannot be a top-down approach. He's trying to inspire a bottom-up change in order to create the sort of systemic changes that we need.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that was different about the inauguration, and I don't mean this in a flippant way at all, because I think it really does mark him out from the previous administration, was the role of people like Lady Gaga, the role of people like Amanda Gorman. These people really resonate with not just Americans, but people across the world, that these are new, fresh, young, progressive voices for unity, but also for healing those wounds, but actually solving some of the problems that, of course, have generated the bitterness in the first place. I mean, for me, it was obviously a very professional operation. It was a classic American show, and in some ways, I think Lady Gaga stole that show. But I think it did have. Do you agree? It had symbolism that was actually much deeper than just an entertainment performance.
Absolutely. And I don't know if many people would have also followed the call it a concert celebrating America that was hosted by Tom Hanks during the evening. You had voices like Bruce Springsteen headlining that. So you had a nice meeting of the new and the old. I don't want to call Bruce Springsteen old. He's more eternal, but you get the point. It's trying to bring everyone together in a celebratory moment. And I see what you're getting at with sort of the symbolism of the ceremony. Joe Biden is someone who has a strong belief in symbolism, in the power of example, as opposed to the example of power, another phrase he used. And so I think we'll be seeing a lot of that, right? And symbols go a long way, as does, for instance, Kamala Harris becoming our first woman vice president as well. That's another very strong symbol.
Indeed, and that was, given everything that America's gone through, to see Kamala Harris reach that position and be celebrated for that historic appointment following her election was quite something. Yeah, real milestone for the US. Absolutely. Turning to the world, and I think this is really the question that we want to focus on, the implications of the Biden administration now on the EU and the world. But before I do that, just to again ask you the question. He obviously he wants to be more outward looking. He wants, for example, he said, we all understand the world is watching us all today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America's been tested and we've come out stronger. We'll repair our alliances and engage with the world once again. And he goes on to address some of the challenges he wants to work with those partners with in order to address them. But the big question is this, surely, that the domestic agenda is so daunting, which he admits himself. It's unprecedented, probably since the American Civil War, certainly since the Second World War. How is he going to have time, energy, bandwidth, capacity to focus on a very global and ambitious agenda when he has so much to do back at home?
That really, you hit the nail on the head right there. He has, I think you would, to be fair, he has three major crises on his hands when many presidents would be unlucky to deal with one major crisis. He has three to deal with simultaneously. You know, you have the pandemic, you have the economic hit, and you have systemic racism that, you know, many people hope he can help deal with. And the bandwidth issue, I think, is a fair point. His solution to that so far is to hit the ground running, to put in place a team who have experience, who many of whom were working in the Obama administration, and so that there's not going to be any requirement to learn on the job. You can start on day one and execute what the president would like to see happen. He doesn't have his entire cabinet yet, but he has made several appointments across agencies to get the work started. So his solution to the daunting task of what he has to do is to hit the ground running, and he doesn't have any time to waste.
Yeah, and I guess by way of example, you've mentioned it before, I think you actually predicted it would happen. John Kerry obviously has a leading role on one of the defining issues that no doubt will shape his presidency, which is tackling climate change. What's the position there, Ryan? I know he's been very busy signing executive orders in the last few hours, obviously on the back of John Kerry's appointment. But I think some dramatic news from the White House already on the issue of climate.
Well, yes, that Joe Biden has recommitted the U.S. to the Paris Agreement. So in 30 days' time, there'll be once again members. And that's a very strong symbol. And John Kerry was a key player in getting the Paris Agreement signed originally. So for him, that's a nice little personal success. But and we'll get onto this when we talk about Europe, I suspect. But you know, re-signing the Paris Agreement is a good symbol. But in the last 4 years, the world has moved beyond Paris. Right? Paris is no longer enough. It is a baseline nowadays. So to see the U.S. recommit to the Paris Agreement is just more of a repudiation of Trump's climate skepticism than it is the U.S. saying we're back. Although the U.S. is back, they're going to be looking for stronger symbols to be agreed in Glasgow at COP26 than to rely on just re-signing the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is a very early, quick win to set the tone, something you'll be seeing Joe Biden do a lot of. But John Kerry's job now is to put the U.S. back in front, right? Now that they're catching up, let's get back in front. Yep,
indeed. I mean, symbolism, important though it is, as you say, will now be followed up very rapidly by John Kerry's, not his words, but by his deeds in the coming, probably in the coming days. So let's turn now to the European reaction. I mean, you could predict probably the reaction, but I think some of the detailed reactions from the European Union institutions yesterday, I think were worth doing a bit of a deep dive in this show. As you know, we're very proud to do a deep dive into some of the details, which should not be overlooked or missed, because again, I think they will define the transatlantic relationship between the EU and the US. So first of all, we're going to listen to the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who spoke yesterday to the European Parliament, and we've edited a short package now of her reaction to Joe Biden's inauguration.
This new dawn in America is the moment we've been waiting for so long. Europe is ready for a new start with our oldest and most trusted partner. And this is why the Commission recently has adopted a new forward-looking transatlantic agenda. And it focuses on where we can together join forces to push for global change based on our common values, interests, and global influence. From climate change to health, from digitalization to democracy, these are global challenges that need renewed and improved global cooperation. And the European Union and the United States must lead from the front and bring an alliance of like-minded partners with us. There is, of course, no greater need for global cooperation in the short term than in tackling the pandemic, which has been so devastating on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm delighted that on day one, as they announced, the new American administration, the United States, will rejoin the Paris Agreement. This will be a very strong starting point for our renewed cooperation. And of course, way more is to come. The United States are back, and Europe stands ready to reconnect with an old and trusted partner, to breathe new life in our cherished alliance.
Well, pretty striking words there, and the US is back and welcoming an old friend essentially back to the fold. Your reactions there, Ryan, to what Ursula von der Leyen was saying?
Well, I think she was reflecting what a lot of Europeans really think about the US being back. And also what a lot of Americans will hope a Joe Biden victory sent as a message around the world. Now, speaking before Ursula von der Leyen yesterday was also Charles Michel, who's the president of the European Council, representing the actual member state governments directly. He had a bit more of a cautious tone, talking about how Europe still has to pursue its own autonomy. So you had almost a good cop, bad cop routine going there yesterday. Of course, the European Commission thinks that a Biden presidency is the way to help it achieve many of its quite ambitious goals, whereas the member states might think that no matter who's the US president, we've seen that a lot can change in 4 years. So you are welcoming back an old friend to the club, but has the club changed? And that is the real question that Europe has to contend with going forward.
Yeah, indeed. And Ryan, I spotted that nuance as well. And again, just to quote, if I may, Charles Michel yesterday, he said the US and the EU, we have our differences. He went on to say, and they will not magically disappear. America seems to have changed, he claimed. How it is perceived in Europe and the rest of the world has also changed. Likewise, the US views the EU may also have changed. So I think what he's hinting at there is that we are not going to go back to the good old days. That was perceived to be good old days of the old alliance between the EU and the US, or Europe and the US, that the relationship has changed forevermore, and there will be problems now as well as opportunities. And I think that's really going to be the thing to watch for the next few years. But as you say, it was interesting, the good cop, bad cop act by the two senior commission officials yesterday. But of course, even VDL made the point, and I think this is again maybe something that the US administration has to realize, that Europe sees the US now as an equal partner. Van der Leyen referred to a circle of like-minded states that they will be working together. So the idea that the US will automatically become a global leader again, that's not quite how the EU is going to see it. So do I detect here not just words, but again, a source of potential conflict and tension as efforts are made to rebuild the alliance?
Yes, I mean, you almost have a fight of two sides that were well represented by Charles Michel and von der Leyen, and that is a debate over how should the EU react to this, right? Should we be welcoming to the return of the US? Should we stand our ground and say, look, wait a minute, for the last 4 years, you've left us hanging. We've been alone to fight many of the things that you started. And so they need to strike a very careful balance here, because between forgetting the last 4 years and then between almost antagonizing the United States, as Charles Michel ran the risk of doing, right? For how long do you hold over the Trump presidency as opposed to just moving ahead and getting things done, right? Now the EU is asking itself, we are equal partners. How does the US see us? And quite frankly, I don't think the US is at the point where it sees the EU as an equal partner to itself. Sure, the EU will be there to help the US accomplish certain goals. But can the EU move fast enough? That's a big question, right? The US has more flexibility with what it can do. It's not necessarily tied to the same procedures that take a long time and frustrate many in the EU. And so we need to be very careful because the EU is talking a very big game. And under the Trump presidency, it was able to some extent, back it up. But now with the Biden presidency and the US is ready to start running again, the EU has to be careful that in talking a big game, it's not overestimating its own ability to keep up.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, von der Leyen mentioned, of course, the strategy that they recently adopted, the transatlantic agenda, and she mentioned, of course, also that one of her first initiatives is to perhaps set up a joint trade and technology council with the US. When you've had a look at these initiatives and these documents, is there real substance in here? Do you think there is the makings of at least the beginnings of a new relationship that will actually affect global change?
It's a tough one. On some areas, they have some, I would say, some really specific areas that you can look at and say, there's room here to maneuver, for sure. On technology and on digital matters, not so much, because as we know, that you have the EU's desire to tax these big digital companies, most of whom are American, which has proven a strong point of friction with the Trump administration, and that is not going away anytime soon. However, on climate, and for our viewers, we keep going back to climate, which we sound like a broken record. This partnership is going to be founded on the art of the possible, right? Where do we agree? And let's build a partnership from those starting blocks, and let's see if there's a spillover effect that leads into other areas that are less obvious for cooperation, like trade, like agriculture, right? These things will be discussed. They probably won't be agreed, but who knows? And then there's the big elephant in the room, China. How does each partner in this relationship deal with China? The US has a very negative view, and that's been acted on in their policy. The EU is a bit more trying to play both sides, right? Signing an investment deal with China and yet attacking them for human rights abuses. And so that will be a very interesting thing to see how they reconcile those two stances. I don't see how that is very obvious.
Yeah. So maybe to move on to those potential flashpoints there, one is China, and indeed this investment deal could well be scuppered, not just because of internal EU concerns, particularly on the human rights aspects and the labour rights aspects that's already been raised by a lot of members of the European Parliament, but as you say, US pressure as well, although the EU retorts, well, the Americans already have an investment deal with China. But secondly, on the digital side, and again, the words of Ursula von der Leyen, yes, they were pretty strong. We must impose democratic limits, she said, on the untrammeled and uncontrolled political power of the internet giants. And of course, she's referring here to the internet giants in America. So you've got the makings here of potential conflict areas, which, as you say, may actually ultimately overshadow all the good cooperation that there will be, no doubt, in areas like climate change. Is there a way? Is there a middle way here? Is there a third way here that the US and EU can see that the greater goal of a transatlantic alliance and greater global stability on issues like trade and indeed tackling COVID, as well as promoting their democratic and human rights agenda, that these issues can be managed, differences can be managed in a way that doesn't upset the apple cart?
Well, this is really a massive question, because these differences are not easily solved. And what that means is that they have the risk of being a brake on moving forward. And for Joe Biden, who just simply doesn't have the time nor the bandwidth to deal with arguments, I can also see the risk of the EU and the US putting aside these possible points of disagreement for a later date and focusing exclusively on where they do agree. Because the EU is not under the same time constraint as the US is. Also, to be quite frank, the EU operates very slowly, and so even on the big tech giants that they want to, for example, tax through their Digital Services Act, we're looking at 18 months down the line before that's a reality. That's just far too slow for the US to support them on, and so the real change on them will come on from the US side in any case. So there is a need for the two sides to come together on the flashpoints. Whether they decide that there's simply not enough time between now and the US midterm elections, which will already slow things down for Joe Biden, and where the Democrats could potentially lose the majorities that they have currently enjoying in the House, the Senate, and Joe Biden in the White House. That's a big risk, and so to move forward, they may have to ignore some of the disagreements.
Yeah, actually, the timelines perhaps are not so aligned, in the sense that you remind us all that the Democrats only have a 2-year window to make some of the more substantive radical changes that they wish to make. And even things like some presumably executive orders could well be challenged. Biden's appointments could well be challenged. Mm-hmm. And of course, we've still got the lingering issue of what to do with Donald Trump and the impeachment proceedings that could bog down the Senate for some time to come.
But also the pandemic, which is not going away anytime soon, with vaccine rollout proving an issue in the U.S. and in many countries in Europe. So you have to tackle that. That's a huge priority. Beyond that's going to be a joint priority for sure. But before you attempt to attack any of the other issues we've mentioned, you have to get the pandemic under control.
Yeah, I mean, and indeed, Biden made a very good point yesterday that the virus has taken as many lives in 1 year as in all of World War II. And I think this is quite a shocking way of illustrating how big the toll that the pandemic is imposing, not just on human life, but of course the economy and fabric of society. And that's of course true in Europe and the world too. That for the best will in the world, the pandemic is going to dominate politics for the coming year, sadly, whether we like it or not. But Charles Michel outlined 5 priorities for cooperation. He mentioned COVID-19 being one of them, but also he mentioned multilateral cooperation. He mentioned tackling climate change, which we've already covered. Rebuilding our economies, fair trade and digital transformation, and security and peace. We haven't actually heard a lot on the security and peace issue. Donald Trump made a lot of this, particularly in relation to contributions to NATO, but rather poo-pooed efforts to strengthen the transatlantic alliance in relation to both NATO and indeed the EU. And we didn't hear a lot in the last 4 years about rebuilding our economies, the synergy and the potential globally of the EU and the US promoting free trade. So do you think these 2 areas that are obviously strategic priorities for the European Council, representing the 27 member states, that these will be there? Perhaps they're not in the headlines, but this is a lot of work will go on in these areas. And at the end of the day, post-pandemic, which we hope we will get through this year thanks to the vaccine, rebuilding the economy so no one is left behind. And I think that's a phrase probably, building back better, no one's left behind, essentially means the same thing. Free trade, prosperity. At the end of the day, isn't that what's going to define the success of the Biden presidency?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I would argue that on security and defense, that a Joe Biden presidency is ushering in a small but not unimportant change, and that is to include climate change and development as security issues, promoting the role of U.S. aid around the world. He has tapped Samantha Power, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, to run it. And then promoting John Kerry's role to ensure that climate change is pretty much everywhere in U.S. priorities, but also as a national security issue. And that is something the EU will look at and think, we agree. And so I think that they have dealt with that priority. In terms of rebuilding the economy, yeah, that is going to take most of the bandwidth from both sides. We'll have a forthcoming stimulus package in the U.S. to have a first stab at doing just that. But as Thomas Friedman, U.S. economist, said, I think last week, that until you get the pandemic under control, it's pie in the sky thinking to think that you can already rebuild the economy. So perhaps we're looking at the first movements towards that being in the summer, right? When people assume things might return or start returning to some sense of normalcy. So to try and rebuild the economy as the pandemic is reaching peaks in many countries seems to be naive.
Well, indeed, and of course, many of his best ambitions could well be derailed in his first 100 days because of the enormity of the COVID-19 crisis. Before we come, and we always come, and we end these programs really with the milestones. What's going to happen next, Ryan? Perhaps we could deal with the other elephant in the room, and that is Donald Trump. To be honest, I was more fascinated by his leaving as much as I was with Biden's arrival, and indeed the manner of Trump's leaving. Some people may have seen him whisked away in Marine One, the helicopter. Pretty downbeat, downcast, gloomy figure indeed he cast. I think some of us never thought that day would happen, that he actually voluntarily left the White House, but he did. He left apparently a very positive letter for Joe Biden to read when he arrived. But is that the end of Trump? Is that the last we'll see of him?
Well, I mean, his ceremony was as much about him as more than anything else. And these transitions, these inauguration day, is supposed to be about, quite frankly, U.S. democracy and then the change of power. But he had his own farewell show, and he had his own farewell speech before boarding Air Force One back down to Florida. And he said, we'll be back in some form. And people have been trying to piece together what that means. And in one of his final acts in office, he gave among many pardons, he gave a pardon to Steve Bannon, who many will remember was really the architect of the ideology that got Trump into office. And many think that potentially they will explore forming a new party. One of the names that's been rumored is the Patriot Party. Now, the success of third parties in the United States is, quite frankly, a joke. They always say the future belongs to a third party candidate, but really the present does not belong to them, right? They always get hammered. So that would be a very tough path. Now he's probably one of the most self-confident men in the world. So if anyone thinks they can do it, he probably does. However, we still have the small matter of his impeachment trial in the Senate, which will still happen. And one of the punishments, as we mentioned in our last show, is the Senate could prohibit him from holding future office. Now, for him, that would be a devastating blow. Leaving the White House is not the end of Trump. That, however, that impeachment punishment could be.
And just picking on one point in terms of foreign policy that I think was noticeable by his absence, of course, pretty strong words for China in his speech, his final speech in the White House, but no mention of Russia, from what I recall. Any significance in that, Ryan? I mean, the handling of Russia, of course, has also defined the Trump presidency and to some extent its legacy, and will continue to resonate because I think there's still legal proceedings. It's a factor, of course, in the impeachment. Quite an extraordinary 4 years of a roller coaster in terms of U.S.-Russian relations, right to the very end. How is that going to play out now? I mean, were they as downbeat in the Kremlin as they were in Florida at Trump's golf course last night?
I mean, Foreign policy under President Trump was as crazy as his Twitter feed. One day he's, for example, best friends with Kim Jong-un. The next day he's threatening on Twitter to wipe them off the face of the earth. There was no consistency. And so, although I do think that Joe Biden was not the candidate the Kremlin would have wanted to win, although there will be more stability for the world, the Russia policy, I think, is going to be more straightforward, more confrontational for sure. All you have to do is look at some of Joe Biden's campaign speeches about Russia, about how he wants to deal with Putin. And then on other issues like China, the question is, has Trump locked the U.S. into a policy with China that Joe Biden cannot reverse? That's a concern, right? You've had so much confrontation that is it that easy to reverse it? And then with the rest of the world, in some places, the U.S. had no foreign policy under Trump, and so there's a clean slate for Joe Biden to start afresh. And so the legacy of Trump on foreign policy is quite linked to his personality. It's just all over the place.
And before we come on to, and I just as a follow up to that, really, before we move on to the next milestones, just to get a clear answer to you on that the point, the central one we made right at the beginning, really summing all that up. Biden, opportunity or challenge for Europe? Mm-hmm. Where are you going to place your bets?
If I had to pick, I would love to pick both, and I would love to say I can't answer that question. However, gun to my head, I would say challenge, because the last 4 years, Trump has proven a very useful foil for what the EU wants to achieve in terms of its autonomy. And a lot of what it wants to do has been pushed through in part thanks to the rhetoric that Trump has been putting forward. They will no longer have that. They will no longer have that clear external threat from the White House. In fact, they'll have an ally from the White House. And a lot of people in Europe might start to think, okay, maybe Trump was the exception. He was the aberration. And now the US is back as it was. That is something the EU will have to contend with domestically, because there was a consensus of sorts over the EU becoming more autonomous. And the Commission's plans and the Commission itself is really built on that idea. The question now is, do they have to rein that in? How do they proceed with that kind of idea now that Biden's in the White House? So for me, it's a challenge on that front, for sure.
Well, thanks for that insight, Ryan. Well, you correctly predicted the result of the election. I think you called the election before I think any US network. You called it correctly. So I think we'll probably attach quite a lot of weight to your wise words there. We'll no doubt come back to that when we approach 4 years' time, the end of the Biden first term, and see how your prediction went. But just the final question, really, what next? Mm-hmm. Key dates and milestones. What should we look out for? What are we going to be talking about on episode 19?
Well, in terms of concrete dates, things are still up in the air. Now, supposedly, Frans Timmermans, the executive vice president for a European Green Deal in the Commission, will have a meeting with John Kerry in the coming days. That is something to watch out for. That will be the first signs of a climate partnership. The next milestone after that will be Joe Biden is going to be invited to a summit, a virtual summit with the EU. That will try and formalize what's been talked about back and forth about a new partnership. And that will then set things going up until COP26, which is, for me right now, a huge moment for the US and the EU. And in terms of milestones after that, you have the midterm elections and so on. And then for the EU, this year, you also have the Dutch elections, the German elections, and then next year, the French elections, which will keep things interesting for that partnership. So there are a lot of obstacles, a lot of milestones to get through, and we're just going to have to take them as they come. I think that this partnership is dynamic for many reasons. One of them is for how quickly things can change, as we've seen from the last few years. Don't be surprised if an election somewhere in Europe or a missed opportunity for getting together will throw things up in the air once again.
Well, it sounds like we've got plenty to talk about on probably more than one show, Ryan. In the coming
you have to have a spin-off show.
Indeed, yeah. And it sounds like a lot of sleepless nights for you following all these elections and various twists and turns of US, European and global politics.
Well, thankfully, the European elections are on a more agreeable time zone than the US ones.
Yeah. So thanks for that, Ryan. If we could just thank our viewers once again, our loyal viewers who've been following us through all 18 episodes of the US presidential election show. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you like. I hope you share. I hope you comment. I hope you subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and hopefully, above all, you tune in again for episode 19. So thank you so much for watching. And finally, thank you, Ryan Hunter, for your insight and wisdom yet again on episode 18. I look forward to speaking to you on the next presidential election show.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.